I labelled it urban terrorism. Am I exaggerating?
No, I think we need to call this act for what it is. It is an act of terrorism. There are people who have firebombed a synagogue designed to intimidate people who are going about their religious practices, designed to cause damage and indeed have caused damage. And I think that the problem with the way in which governments, particularly the federal government and the state government in Victoria, have been dealing with these issues, and even the state government here in New South Wales, is that they've been downplaying anti-Semitism from the beginning. When there's a hate crime that has been committed and one that is designed to intimidate people, one that is designed to destroy property and attack people on the basis of their religion, when the crime is designed to strike fear into the hearts of law-abiding Australians, it is an act of terrorism, pure and simple, and we must call it out as such.
No coincidence a Friday was chosen. How do you think the community from that synagogue tonight would be feeling about what occurred in that building at 4:30 this morning?
Well, I've been speaking to some of the leaders from that community. They were very concerned about people who were injured in those attacks. They were concerned about the damage to the sacred books, in particular the Torah scrolls that are still in there. And being a Friday evening, this is a time where Jews celebrate the Sabbath for the next 24 hours. They were very concerned to find a place where they could observe Shabbat and where they could, therefore rebuild their community and have services beyond that time. They've got something for this weekend, but they are really struggling to work out, well, what comes next.
Well, what does come next? I mean, how are we going to stop this? I mean, you've been almost daily on Sky since last year talking about the rise of anti-Semitism. I mean, my colleague Shari Markson got very emotional on our air this afternoon. She's feeling it. Every Jew in Australia is feeling it. Is there a political solution here? What can we do to turn this back? Can we go back to where we were?
I think we can go back, Steve, and I think we must go back to where we were. But that starts with a few things. The first thing is to call out anti-Semitism where we see it and actually to do something about it, to see our laws that are on the statute books enforced, to stop seeing Jewish people intimidated out the front of synagogues by some of these terrible protests, to call out some of the phrases like from the river to the sea for what exactly they are, to prosecute people with the full force of the law, to ensure that where prosecutions are not working, that we look to change the law immediately, to be unequivocal about anti-Semitism and not, mush it up as the government and some of the Teals have done by equating it with Islamophobia or with LGBTI hatred, to see it as its own standalone hatred with its own conspiracy. And I think the other thing that we need to do and see is what I've been seeing in my electorate. I don't represent very many Jews at all in my community. My community has lots of Christians and Hindus and Buddhists. And as I've been going to Christmas carols and to end-of-year school presentations, and as I've been shopping across the electorate, people just stop me every day, even this morning, and tell me to keep standing up against the anti-Semitism that they are with me. I think the vast middle of the country hates seeing this. And the most important thing that we can do is actually to change the government of the country at the coming federal election, because this government has been appalling. And the most appalling thing it has done is ever since the 7th of October, it has been delegitimising the Jewish state on the international arena. And we've only seen that a couple of days before this. In my view, there is a direct line between the government's position at the United Nations, changing our votes and abandoning Israel, and the arsonists' views here. You cannot, on the one hand, delegitimise the Jewish state and expect that that's not going to have an effect on the standing of the Jewish people in our country. And the Jewish community of Australia and law-abiding, decent Australians are thoroughly sick of it.
Is it too much of a leap to suggest that the attitudes of the federal government and what occurred in the UN this week and the way that we voted and turned our back on an ally like Israel could give some succour to anti-Semites who take some strength out of that and convince themselves in their muddled and dreadful way that what they're doing is a right thing to do because they're not being condemned strongly enough by those in charge.
I think you're right, Steve. Even before the 7th of October, the government has been backsliding in its position in relation to Israel. For 20 years, there's been a fight for the soul of the Labor Party, which right-thinking, decent Australians have been losing to people who want to play domestic political games with our foreign policy. And that's what we've been seeing as Israel, the Jewish state, the only democracy in the Middle East, the only democracy that respects human rights, the rights of women, the rights of LGBTI people, religious pluralism. While that country is being abandoned by our government, it says something to Australians that somehow Jews are not legitimate enough to have their own state, that the Jewish state is somehow illegitimate. And that gives cover, it gives a nudge and a wink to people who would seek to commit dreadful acts of terrorism, dreadful acts of intimidation against Jewish people in this country. So I think the government's policy at the international level has had a real effect here, and also their failures to deal with anti-Semitism. I mean, Steve, as you say, I've been on Sky almost every day for a year on these issues. I've been calling for a judicial inquiry into anti-Semitism on campus. The government couldn't even do that. They took almost a year to bring forward legislation to prevent doxing of Jewish creatives and artists. And there are supposedly within the ranks of the government people who say they support Israel, people like Mark Dreyfus and Richard Marles. How can they continue to sit in the cabinet and give cover for people like Penny Wong and others who continue to make life in this country difficult for Jewish Australians? Isn't it time that those people took a point of principle and resigned from the cabinet of the government of this country?
I think that some of them are going to really struggle to look in the mirror tomorrow after what happened at 4:30 this morning. I want to play what the Prime Minister said. Now, to give him a little bit of leeway, he was on the other side of the country in Western Australia when he was asked to respond to what happened today. But I think what I'm about to play you was an inadequate, and that's being polite, response from the PM. Have a look.
Well, anti-Semitism is something that has been around for a long period of time, of course. But anti-Semitism has been on the rise. We call it out wherever we see it.
Well, anti-Semitism hasn't been around for a long time in Australia. Isn't that the point?
Well, we've never seen anti-Semitism of the sort we've seen in the last year, Steve. That's the point. And the Prime Minister's been in charge for the last year, and he's been too equivocal about calling it out. And he's been too equivocal about taking every necessary measure to protect law-abiding Australians here. Jewish people just want to get on with their lives. They want to be able to go to their synagogues, to send their children to school. They want to be able to go to the Jewish Museum. They want to be able to observe the festivals. They want to visit their parents and grandparents in Jewish aged care facilities and not have to think twice about their security in doing so. No other group in this country is facing the security challenges that the Jewish community is facing at this time. Those security challenges have only grown since the 7th of October. And the great tragedy of what we've seen the government doing in abandoning the Jewish community is we know that the hate that starts with Jews never ends with Jews. And so what we're seeing today could easily be applied to Christians, to Hindus, to Muslims, to Buddhists, and to people of no faith. We need in this country, Steve, to be a country where everyone is entitled to the protection of the law if they work hard and they abide by the law. What we have seen in the last 12 months is everyone else is entitled to the protection of the law except the Jewish community. And the Jewish community has been warning the government about this, and this government has been sitting on their hands. This government has lost the moral authority to continue to govern. It saddens me as a federal member of parliament that I am saying this. I want our community, the Jewish community, to have bipartisan support. I want Israel to have the bipartisan support that it had all through the Hawke and Keating years, even under Julia Gillard. But this government has abandoned the Jewish community. It has abandoned the Jewish state. And I think other Australians need to ask themselves, who else are they willing to sell out?
Julian, great words. Just finally, what would your message be to Jewish Australians that might be watching us on Sky tonight?
Tonight is Shabbos. I want to encourage Jewish Australians to stand tall, to light the candles and bring the light and hope into the world that we do so well. To know that fundamentally Australia remains the good country that it has always been. That while we lack the leadership that we deserve in this country today, that there are millions of Australians who are standing with us. Millions of Australians that I interact with in my electorate, people like the Australians I interact with in my electorate, who find this a shameful episode in our history and who want an Australia where all of us are free to live, where all of us are free to practice and worship our God in the manner in which we do, in a peaceful way, and to contribute to a country that we love and have served right since the very beginning.
Julian Leeser, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Steve.